Appreciate you guys having us tonight. So my name is Brad Schacht, and as was already mentioned, I'm a principal program manager on the Fabric Cat team, joined tonight by Venkatesh, who is also on the Fabric Cat team. So we basically spend our days working to ultimately make a better fabric at the end of the day, which is a really weird thing to say. I don't think I've said that since we changed the name, but that sounds like we're switching from like I don't know, polyester to cotton or whatever. But anyway, so ultimately our job is like I said, though, to build a better product, we'll say. So we spend a lot of our time interacting directly with customers on a daily basis and working to help provide guidance on how to implement these solutions successfully. And so any feedback that you all have, we would love to hear that. There's a variety of outlets that you can give feedback about the product. One of the best places to go is ideas.fabric.microsoft.com or aka.ms/fabric ideas. And that's our public ideas page where you can go out, post new ideas, whether that's feature improvements or new features that we don't have yet in there. So you can go out there and vote on things and make sure that we're hopefully prioritizing those for the future. So obviously there was a big announcement with Fabric recently, and so that's where we're going to go tonight. So just give you kind of an overview of everything that we've got going on here. My contact information is there on the screen. I'll pop it up again at the end in case anybody wants to reach out after. And so let's go ahead and get going here. So if you've been around the data analytics space for any period of time, you'll know that it's large, it's vast and complex. So there's a ton of different solutions out there. This kind of eye chart here put together by First Mark sort of illustrates that. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of different analytics products out there. And we as Microsoft are a very small box someplace on the screen, which I can't quite find. Okay, we're kind of like right in the middle of the red or all the way at the very bottom of the red. So like we're just like one little spot on there. So we realize that there's a lot to do in the analytics space. And this is an example of actual customer architectures that we've implemented in the past. And your architecture in your environment today probably looks pretty similar to this. And there's a lot of lines, a lot of boxes to connect, and all those sort of things, meaning that your data is all over the place. There's a lot of different solutions to manage, and that's ultimately what led us to start looking at Fabric. So we realized there were some good things about the analytics space and around data warehousing and business intelligence as a whole, that there is a fairly predictable pattern for a lot of this stuff. If you've been working in the cloud for any amount of time now, you've probably heard the modern data warehouse architecture or the modern data lake architecture as it kind of evolved into the modern data analytics architecture. It's kind of all the same thing. You're going to grab data from somewhere, you're going to drop it into a data lake more than likely, and do some level of processing on top of it, clean it up, and then you're going to ultimately report that data out. So if we look at that from a Microsoft perspective, obviously, we have solutions for all of this stuff, whether it's Data Factory to bring data in or Azure Data Lake Storage to be able to store that data lake, all the way through Power BI, which everybody has been using for a long time and kind of knows and loves now. But again, there's still a lot of integration that has to happen. It's still a very complex environment. And we took steps to simplify this to an extent with Synapse. That was, a step in the right direction. We kind of brought the ETL in your data warehousing, your data integration, your data engineering experience with Spark, all under the same umbrella. But there were still some fundamental issues with the way that customers today are actually using these services. There's still a level of integration that you have to go through in order to get like your data lake involved in that solution. Power BI is still an external piece that has to be bolted onto the end of that. If you want to get the real-time data from Kusto or something like that, then you have to go someplace else to get that information. So we realized again that, yeah, we have solutions, we're working in the right direction, but it's still a little bit complex. So that's ultimately where Fabric came in. And we said, you know what, we want to provide folks an experience where you don't have to worry about all these little pieces and how they all fit together. We're going to take some more of those different integration pieces that you had to do still, even inside of Synapse, and we're going to take that a bunch of steps forward to try to make the whole thing easier. Not only are we going to make things work together better, but we're going to remove a lot of the management and overhead that you would normally have to go through in order to set up the environment, which we'll talk about in just a second. So one thing that we've realized along the way is that there's also these different personas inside the organization that are all trying to get to ultimately a level of insight into what's going on. You've got your report developers, you've got your ETL developers, or your data warehouse professionals, and your data engineers that like to write PySpark potentially, or maybe some of them that want to write some Spark and SQL. You got your R folks. And so what we've done is we've said, hey, everybody can come into this playground that is Fabric, but what we're going to do is we're going to try to guide you in the right direction if you do happen to want to do a specific thing. So if you come in the door and you say, I'm an integration professional, I need to grab data and build some pipelines, we're going to give you a landing page, an experience in there that's going to surface the most relevant information for you. And so we've done that across all the different major workloads inside Fabric. And when we built Fabric, we really set out to do a few different things. There were a few guiding principles that were actually that we were looking at along the way. We wanted to build that complete analytics platform, meaning try to plug some of those gaps that we had before inside of Synapse, where things were together but not quite all the way together. One thing that we heard loud and clear from customers is that we don't want to have everything sitting in these proprietary engines every step along the way. So we've done a lot of work to make the entire Fabric platform work off of one lake and work off one copy of data, and that one copy of data being in the Delta format so that you can access that data with different engines and those sort of things. And then we're also trying to continue our integration into things like Teams to and PowerPoint with better integration between having your Power BI reports show up and be interactive inside PowerPoint. So we're trying to empower everybody to be successful again, no matter where you are in this life cycle or across the development stack. And then ultimately, of some of the things that you might have seen at Build, AI is going to be everywhere. So we've got all these different co-pilot experiences that we're going to be enabling to be able to help accelerate your actual development and have to reduce the amount of time you have to spend figuring things out. We're going to help you out along the way. So what we're doing is we're trying to deliver this as more of a SaaS platform. So what that does not mean is it does not mean you lose all control over everything inside the platform. You're still going to be able to set up your own security. You're still going to be able to determine how much scale you want. So you're going to be able to control the cost very granularly if you want to. But what we're doing in this environment is we're saying we're going to give you an easier onboarding experience. And you'll see some of this in play in the demos that we kick off here in just a moment. And part of that is the instant provisioning piece there. So you don't have to sit around and wait for 20, 30 minutes sometimes, or even some of the quicker provisionings like 5 or 10 minutes for some of this stuff. We're just going to be able to start working and driving to an outcome. We also, I mentioned, we want to not only plug the gaps, but we want to reduce some of the friction to be successful. So when we say success by default, for somebody working in, like the data warehouse world, that might mean we don't have to go worry about rebuilding indexes every single time that we load data, or we don't have to worry about rebuilding statistics every single time that we load data, or we don't have to go in and make sure that we're managing all these different compute engines and make sure that we're looking at cost controls for all of those. We're going to be able to just have a single compute engine or a single compute cost that we divvy up among all the different services in the back end. So we're trying to make sure that you don't have to tune as many knobs, but we'll give them to you where we need to so that you can be successful. And then, of course, centralized administration, meaning that everything is going to be able to be governed across the entire platform. You're going to see integration with things like Purview start to come in, things like One Security that are going to go over the entire platform. So everything is going to be able to be centrally administered and discoverable. So what Fabric actually looks like is very similar to what we saw on the screen a minute ago, But now all these things, again, they kind of work together. And the real magic of Fabric, whether you're doing data factory to bring data in, whether you're doing data engineering in the Spark environment, all the way through Power BI, is that everything is actually underpinned by that one lake layer. One lake is really the star of the show in a lot of ways. And so next month, you'll hear about this in a lot more detail. But what One Lake is doing for us is giving us the foundation to store all the data in one location that you don't have to go and manage a bunch of storage accounts. So you don't have to worry about do I have enough storage accounts out there to get the IOPS that I need? We'll handle managing all that kind of stuff for you. You don't have to worry about, well, is the networking set up right to be able to access this from my SQL compute engine or my Spark engine? We handle all the integration with all that stuff and make sure that it's all secure. And we're, again, going to be storing the data in one format in the back end, which is Delta. And so One Lake, you have one lake for your entire environment that you can then share and divvy the data up and share it to folks among different workspaces. Um, the other thing that we've done that's fundamentally different than the way that we did things in Synapse is we've really changed the compute engine a lot. And we'll, maybe this is a better session for another day. But essentially, there's all kinds of things that we've done to give you the ability to handle larger workloads, to be able to spread the cost of that workload out so that you don't have to worry about the peaks and valleys quite as much. We'll actually smooth that compute cost over the course of a day for you so that you don't have to worry about, well, 8 o'clock in the morning, everybody's coming in and hitting this, but then at 7 o'clock at night, we've got that lull between when our nighttime routines are going to kick off. So, we'll help you manage all that compute because all of the compute in this environment is handled in a serverless manner there. Okay. The other thing that's nice about kind of the combination of all of these things is that we're able to now use one copy of the data with multiple engines. So I can write data out to One Lake using Data Factory. Then I can consume that data or modify that data with Spark. I can also go out and I can query that data with T-SQL if I want to. If I have a data warehouse, or I can go out and do all my development in my data warehouse, and then the data is just magically accessible to my lakehouse to be able to consume that over in the Spark world. And of course, Power BI has deep integration with all this, which we'll cover very briefly here in just one second. Um, so the other thing that we've done, and I'll show you just a little sliver of this in just a moment, is we've got this concept of shortcuts. So we understand that not everybody's going to move into Fabric and put everything in there on day one. We want you to be able to continue to leverage your existing investment. So that's where this whole concept of shortcuts really came from, was saying, hey, you know what? I've got this data that's already out there. Let me bring that in. But I've also got data that's being developed in all these little silos inside the organization. So that means that somebody coming in from finance, they might have data that they want to grab from the customer records or maybe the telemetry data. So we'll be able to use One Lake to not have to make multiple copies of the data, but we can use these shortcuts or pointers to the data so that everybody can be looking at one copy of the data without having to move it. And also, like I said, we've got those existing investments that we spent years building. So maybe you've got an enterprise data lake out there sitting in ADLS that you want to bring in. We're going to be able to leverage that investment by just doing a shortcut, no data movement. So all those many terabytes or petabytes worth of data that you might have inside of ADLS, you can access all those here in the environment by just creating a pointer to it. Same thing over with Amazon with S3 buckets. If you've got data sitting over there, you can today create a shortcut to an S3 bucket. And coming in the future, you'll be able to do the same thing if you've got data stored over in Google as well. All right, last topic here before we get in and we do spend the rest of the time doing some demos here. And that's the Power BI side of things, because all of this stuff is cool and it's interesting, but at the end of the day, if we can't get data out and get it into the hands of users, then this is all for nothing. And historically, with Power BI, it's been a great tool for us to use. But now that we have all these innovations with Fabric, we want to be able to extend those and modernize our reporting solution a bit. So again, historically, we've had to choose between direct query and import mode, where direct query, you get really up-to-date data, but the performance can be lacking, especially as data sets grow in size. On the opposite side, we have our import mode, which is always super fast because the data is imported and we don't have to go query the underlying data set. But we also have a lag in the data. So maybe I only refresh that once a day. Maybe I only refresh it once a week or something like that. Well, because we're moving again into a world where we standardize on the Delta format, what we're now introducing is the direct lake mode. So no longer do I have to choose between the performance of imports with the real-time nature of direct query mode. Direct Lake will give me the best of both of those worlds by just going directly to the Delta files that are sitting inside one lake. Again, kind of going back to that one copy concept, I can prepare the data with my Spark engine, I can query it with my T-SQL engine, and then I can report on it with Power BI, all without ever having to move it. Once the data is prepared with Spark, the other two experiences that I mentioned in there, we'll just be able to pick that data up and never have to worry about duplicating it in order to move it. So it does a couple of things. One, uh, it reduces our storage costs because we won't have to duplicate the data. Two, it reduces our compute costs because we don't have to spend compute time to copy that data and re-prepare it in whatever engine. And three, it saves us time because now we get faster insights because we don't have to wait for that, maybe several hours delay or days potentially, depending on what your organization does, for that data to land in the bronze layer, go to silver, into gold, move it into a data mart, reload it into an import model, and then be able to finally report out on that. So there's a lot of different, a lot of pieces that all fit together here. The other thing I'll just very briefly mention here, something that we announced at Build, but it's just going into is in private preview, is Data Activator, giving you the ability to find whenever there are changes in your data and be able to take action on that. So if you want to say, once somebody leaves a geofence, for instance, or once the temperature inside of a chiller goes above a certain temperature, there's all these different things all these different rules that you'll be able to put in place on your data to be able to kick off other automations to then be able to take action on that, whether that's sending somebody a message or an email to say, hey, go take a look at this. You might want to make sure that the food's not melting, or whether that's kicking off a Power Automate or some other custom logic that maybe goes and automatically puts in a service request or something like that. So a lot of cool stuff that'll be coming with Data Activator to help tie all of these pieces end to end together. So with that, that's kind of the whole of Fabric, kind of where we were a couple months ago, why we actually came up with this whole idea of Fabric, and what it is in a nutshell, and how all these things fit together. So for the rest of the time, I'd like to spend the next half hour, 45 minutes or so, just showing you guys some demos of what this really looks like in an end-to-end solution for somebody out there who might just be getting started. And so again, if you do have questions along the way, I'll try to keep an eye on the chat. But Venkatesh is here as well to help answer questions, and feel free to raise your hand as well. I'm pretty flexible on how we do this. We'll certainly have some time for questions at the end for Venkatesh and I to be able to answer anything that you guys might have along the way. So to get started with Fabric, here in my web browser, I've just got the homepage, just fabric.microsoft.com. You can actually get to the same page if you go to Power BI, the app.powerbi.com as well. But ultimately, it's all in the same platform, all the same experience, no matter which one of those you go through. So if you happen to be a Power BI person out there today, and you say, hey, I want to go out there and try all this stuff, well, then you're in luck. I'll show you exactly how you can get access to the Fabric, to some of these Fabric workloads, just by clicking that little Fabric icon in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen over there. So before we get too far into this, I would just kind of like to understand a little bit of the personas that we have out there with folks that are watching tonight. So if you don't mind, just do real quick. If you can put in the chat, are you a Power BI person? Are you an ETL developer? Are you a data warehouse developer? Are you a data engineer or a data science? Like, is your kind of broadly, what's your role on a day-to-day basis inside your organizations? Like I said, if you can, just go ahead and toss those in the chat there. Just helps us so we kind of understand where everybody's coming from, both as we're answering questions as well as we go through the content here tonight. So got a couple of Power BI folks. I see a DBA that's out there, certainly some ETL developers, more Power BI. That's certainly to be expected as well. And I see we do have a hand up if we want to go ahead and if there's a question out there, John, if you want to come up, you can go ahead and ask your question before we jump into the demos. By all means, go for it.
Sure. Yeah, Brett, thank you for the introduction. And my question is related to the data warehouse. And I know in the Synapse, if you started the data warehouse, that's assume the 60 servers running behind, so it's very expensive. It's going to be the same situation here, or it's totally different?
So the compute model here in Fabric is completely different than what we had over on the Synapse side. As you mentioned, we had 60 distributions. That was kind of fixed. We split the distributions up among the different compute nodes, but you always had to have a specific amount of compute always reserved for that one workload. So it's probably a longer conversation than we have time to get into tonight. But essentially what we're doing here is we're saying, you know what, you don't have to tell me how much you want to allocate specifically to your data warehouse or to your ETL or to your Power BI reporting. You're just now going to have a Fabric compute unit, and we're going to dynamically, based on the queries that you run across each one of these workloads and how much data it needs and how much time it needs to run, we're going to assign the appropriate amount of compute to have that query finish, so that you don't have to worry about saying, hey, I know I've got this really big workload coming later tonight, so let me scale up, and now I have to pay for this dead time before and after that that process runs. You just have to worry about, all right, well, what time do I want that process to run? When's my data going to be available? And we'll scale the compute up whenever it needs it, and we'll scale it back down for you automatically and transparently in the background whenever you don't. And like I said, there's a much longer conversation around how the compute and everything works. It's maybe good for a separate session, but in a nutshell, no, you don't have to allocate specific amount of compute specifically for a data warehouse like you do today. And the other thing too is you can get started with Fabric through free trial right now for 60 days. But then also once we go into GA, there was a post by Amir. He mentioned all the pricing information was released for just the Azure SKUs, and I think those start at like 36 cents an hour to be able to run any Fabric workload that you want in here. So you can go very, very small on the actual workloads inside of Fabric there.
That's cool. Thank you.
Yep. All righty. So realizing, again, as expected, a lot of Power BI folks out there, bunch of looks like data engineer and ETL developer type folks as well. So we'll try to keep that in mind as we go along here. But like I said, this is where we're going to land. Each one of these experiences I mentioned, depending on what your persona is, if you come in as a Power BI person, you click on the Power BI icon and you see just the normal familiar Power BI interface here. If you click on this little experience changer switcher in the bottom left, then I can actually come over and I can choose any one of these other experiences as well. So if I were to click on data engineering, for instance, what you will notice happen is across the top of the screen, we've got a bunch of things that are very specific to somebody working in the data engineering realm. So we might want to create a lakehouse, we might want to use a notebook to transform some data, and maybe we build a pipeline to actually ingest some data as well. So we'll see these change up here at the top. Again, if we go over to data warehousing, we've got our build a data warehouse, pipelines to ingest data, and then that you'll start to see popping up everywhere is also these samples that we've got available. Okay. Again, this doesn't limit you. You can still get to the entire Fabric experience, no matter which one of these experiences you've selected. But this does give you the ability to just kind of limit what you see, at least on the landing page here. So the way that we're going to get started here is I'm going to go over here and click on the little workspaces button. And just like you would in Power BI, so all my Power BI people out there will be very familiar with this. We're going to create a new workspace, and we're just going to call this one, let's see, what's the day? Today's Thursday. Let's go. I was about to type Wednesday. One more day closer to the weekend. Thursday user group meeting, and we can give ourselves a description in here if we want. We can upload an image to represent our workspace. And then down here at the bottom, this is where we make everything happen. So what you'll notice is right now on my licensing type, go up a little bit here. So in the licensing mode section, we've got the trial that we're working on right now. And then I've also got this premium and fabric capacities that I've got available to me down here. So most everybody out there tonight, you're probably going to get started. You're going to use this trial capacity. But if you want to, this is where those Azure capacities that I just mentioned a second ago come in. If I select that fabric capacity button, then I get a list of different capacities that I have available to me. So I can select this one that I've created in my Azure environment if I want to, and click apply. Again, for your purposes, when you go out there and get started with this, just select trial, you'll be good to go. And that fabric capacity that I just selected, you can go out there and you can pause it. So hopefully I remembered to unpause it before I got started here. Otherwise, we're gonna run into some problems here in a minute, and we'll see what happens when you decide to try to demo things live. But essentially, that's all you have to do is create a new workspace, and now I am ready to go. So one thing that you will know is that this does not work. The Fabric workloads do not work with Power BI Premium per user. So there's that question always comes up. I don't know if that was actually the question, but I did see in the chat Power BI Premium per user popped up there. So I'll just go ahead and preempt that one. There is actually a whole licensing page that you can take a look at in the docs as well that will help you understand what you need and what's included in each one of the different capacities, Fabric, Power BI, Power BI Premium per user, Pro, et cetera, and so on. Okay, so now that I've got my workspace here, the first thing that I'm going to do to get started is I'm going to create a new lakehouse. So I need to have a place to store some data. So again, keep in mind, again, I'm on the warehouse experience down here, as you'll see in the bottom left-hand corner. But you'll notice whenever I click the new button that I actually get all of the different experiences in here. So I can create a KQL database, a lakehouse, any of these things for reports, you name it. So to get started though, again, we're gonna just select the lakehouse option here, and we're gonna go wide world importers, OH for lakehouse, and I'm gonna click create. Alrighty, so now what you normally would have to do at this point to get up to where we are right now, if you were in the Azure world, is I would have to make sure I've got my subscription, and then I have to go provision an Azure Data Lake account. I probably have to give some permissions to it, to maybe some service accounts if I'm using, or it's a managed identities more than likely if I'm doing Synapse. I'd also have to spin up a Synapse workspace to get to where we are right now, if we're kind of doing this in the world 2 months ago. And then I would be ready to actually start uploading some data. But I probably also have to go grab something like Azure Storage Explorer is the best way to get data into the data lake. But what you're going to see here is we've got two sections, tables and files. The difference between these being files is kind of my unstructured. This is just my everything and anything that I want to throw out here, I possibly can. So if you've got of course, like CSV files or tab separated files. If you have Parquet files, you can certainly put those here. But you can also do, like if you just have a .bak file from SQL Server, or maybe you got some PDFs or some videos, you can put anything and everything into this, because underneath, this really is actually just Azure Data Lake storage. And we're managing all and kind of making this all transparent to you, but that's what we actually have running in the background here. And so the reason why that's important, even though we talk about OneLake and everything, you can still interact with OneLake the way that you would interact with Azure Data Lake. So if you've got something like Databricks out there that you want to be able to pull data from, Databricks can talk to Azure Data Lake, it can talk to OneLake, and you would be able to analyze any of these pieces of data just like you would today. So you're still writing everything basically out to Azure Data Lake. The tables section, on the other hand, that's a special section which gives us the ability to take data from the data lake and make it queryable using T-SQL, which I'll show you here in just 1 second. And this is where that Delta format really comes into play. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and just create a new subfolder, and I'm just going to call this folder My Uploads. This is where I'm going to upload my data to. We'll get that folder created. I'm going to right click on this and do Upload Files. We'll come back to a couple of these other ones a little bit later. And we're going to just get started here by grabbing this sale.parquet file that I've got. Okay. So this is a subset of the Wide World Importers data set. So if you're familiar with Microsoft World, historically we've had the Wide World Importers and the AdventureWorks data set. So this is from a subset of that from Wide World Importers. And now I've got my Parquet file out here, but I can't really do much with it, right? It's in that files section. I still have to have some kind of compute to analyze it. Maybe I have to spin up a Spark cluster or something like that. But right now we've at least got data in the environment. This could be a CSV file, Parquet, Excel, you name it, okay? Now, if I want to be able to drive some value off of this data, I need to be able to query it more than likely. Again, if I'm a Spark person, then I'm right at home. I can just go over, we'll take a look at a notebook here in a second, but I could spin up a notebook. If I'm a Power BI person or a SQL person, like I come from a SQL background, I'm probably not going to be super comfortable just messing around with this Parquet file. But the magic of Fabric means that I can take this file, just drag and drop it onto tables, give it a name, click load, and it's basically going to take that Parquet file or the CSV file or whatever it is, and it's going to turn it into a Delta table in the background. So I don't have to know anything about Delta. I don't have to know that it's actually using Delta behind it. I don't have to know any Spark or anything like that. And here, pretty quick, in just a couple of seconds, this is going to tell me that this was successful and that I'm going to have my table actually show up in here. So all of that, just a few seconds, and it's registering the table. And now if I click on my sale, I can actually see it's going to take a second here, but you'll get a preview of that file actually loaded. And I could, if I wanted to, actually go run some T-SQL statements against it, but we'll take a look at that in just one moment. Okay. So from here, actually, let's go ahead and do T-SQL now. So from here, what I can do is I can click on this little Lakehouse switcher up in the top right, and I can go ahead and say, show me the SQL endpoint behind this. Okay. And it's going to do a little bit of magic, just going to switch the UI a little bit here. And now I've got, if I'm a SQL person, I've got an object explorer that I'm probably used to seeing, and I can come over here to my query, and I can just do select top 10 star from dbo.sale, run that query, and I'll get back the first 10 results from my table. So all of that, in just a couple of minutes here, I was able to build out an environment, get some data loaded up into the environment, and query that data with T-SQL, something that I'm familiar with, even though this is technically using a Delta table in the back end. Okay. So what we're going to do is I'm going to hop back to my workspace level here for 1 second, because you'll see that there's actually 3 things that got created when I built that lakehouse. I've also got the SQL endpoint, which we just used a second ago to be able to query that data with T-SQL. And then I also have a data set. And this is where the Power BI integration that's tied into everything in one lake or inside of Fabric all comes together. So if I click on this, I can just come over here and I'm just going to say, give me an auto create report, because I don't want to sit here and create a Power BI report tonight. But you could just create a report from scratch and start building out a report. But what this is going to do is it didn't have to load anything. The data set already knew, hey, I had this sale table in here already. And now I can have this report. It's already interactive. I can come over here. I can change the visualizations, switch this over to a tree map, for instance, if I want to. And just like that, in probably less than 5 minutes, if I were just clicking through this, or certainly in less than 5 minutes if I were just clicking through, I now have all of my my environment set up. I don't have a lot of insight because I only have this one small sample of data here, but in just a couple of minutes, I was able to get the environment set up, get the data loaded, explore the data, and run a query against the data, and build a report against the data here, all very, very quickly and with minimal effort. So that you could do this entire thing without even writing that T-SQL statement. So if you're somebody that says, I don't want to write any code, you don't actually have to write any code in order to be successful over here. Okay. There is one other thing that's really cool that we've done with Fabric, and it's related to being able to get data in. So of course, as you saw, if I hop back over here, I'm not going to save that report, but if I hop back over here into my lakehouse, of course, I can continue to right click and upload new files and things into this environment. But I can also come over and grab my file explorer. I can also come over and we actually have the OneLake file explorer. So if I just do a sync here and I come down and there's my Thursday user group meeting workspace that we just created. And there's my wide world importers lakehouse that I just created. And there's my files in my table section that we already were looking at a minute ago. So if I go into tables, you can see my sale table. You can see the Delta files, the Delta table that it created. And if I go over here into files, into my uploads folder, I can actually, if I jump over here to this folder, let's see, let me grab this customer file from my other screen real quick. Come on, there we go. And I can just copy this customer.parquet file now over into my lakehouse. And in just a moment, we'll give that just a second to sync. And in just a moment, what that's going to do is actually show up. Let's see if it's actually there. We do a quick refresh. There, now I already have my customer parquet file. Okay. So I don't even have to go through and build any ETL or anything like that. I can actually interact with my entire OneLake the same exact way that I would have interacted with any other file system that I've got inside my environment. So now for all you folks out there who are saying, that's cool. I like the click and drag and drop and all that kind of stuff. But what if I am a Spark developer or a data engineer or a T-SQL person out there? Okay, let's address the Spark side of this real quick. So what we can do from the ribbon up here at the top is we can say, hey, I've got these two files out here. I already loaded my sale table, but I'm probably not going to do that on a regular basis. You're not going to come out here and drag and drop the files in. You want to be able to build something repeatable now. That's great for quick insights, but let's build something that we can actually go out and run again. So that's where your notebooks are going to come in. And if I click on Open Notebook, I'm going to say, give me a new notebook. And that's going to load my notebook screen here. And we've got the same file explorer, the same Lakehouse Explorer over here on the left-hand side. So I can drill down into my uploaded files, and I can actually start to build a Spark notebook to read this data in. I don't even have to know all that much Spark, really. I'm not historically a PySpark developer or a Spark developer at all, but I can certainly drag and drop and use this as a basis of code for me to be able to go out and be successful on other things. As a former consultant, I am well versed in do a web search and try to figure out what was actually what's actually going on in order to be able to reuse somebody else's code that they've already written. So let me see if that doesn't like the capacity that I had open there. And if it still does this, we'll just go someplace else. Okay. Oops. Let me start this one again. Notebook. Jump over to a different workspace if we have to here in just a second. I'm going to add my lakehouse back in. Importers. And let's see if we. All right, let me try running this here again and see if this goes better for us. All right. We're working on it. 8 or 9 seconds. And I think we're good this time. So if you are running this over in one of the other Spark engines, let's say something like Synapse Spark, for instance, or over in Databricks maybe. Tables fetch settings. Let's see here. Usually to spin up a new Spark session, that would take probably 5 to 10 minutes or so to be able to do that. But over here, if you look, the query hasn't finished yet, but if you look, it actually only took 8 seconds for this to actually start the Spark session. Let me switch over this other workspace. See if maybe this is why you don't spin up new capacities right before doing presentations here. I should have the same stuff over on this one. So hopefully in my lake house, let me add that in. And my upload, customer. Let me try running that. Right, so 10 seconds. There we go. Okay. So we'll take a look at that capacity later and see what did I screw up. But in the meantime, so what I've basically done here is just said, hey, read that file in for me, and then show it to me. So again, like I said, I don't have to know any Spark in order to do this, but I can, if I am a Spark developer, I can come out here and I can do all of my, all my normal code. I can do all my data cleanup, and then when I'm ready to, I can come out here and say, I want to write this into Delta, and I'm going to save this into the tables section as customer. Okay. Now I'll go ahead and write this. And after this query runs here, if we refresh our list of tables, then now we've got our customer table sitting over here. So just like that, we've got 2 different ways that we can bring data in. We can drag and drop, or 3, I guess. We can right click and do upload. We can drag and drop inside the file explorer, or we can get the data in here, or get the data in, and then we can do some transformation or acquire the data even over here with our Spark engine. Okay, so from here now we start. If you're on the Power BI side, the consumption side of this, you say, all right, now we've got a couple of tables in here. But what do we do about actually creating some relationships and things like that against this data? So if I come over here and I look at, if I come back and refresh this, see if it comes here. Okay. So if I look at my lake house now, and I come over here into my data model. So before we looked at our data, then we ran some queries over top of that data. Again, we did our select top 10 from our fact table. And then we came over, now we can come over here and we can look at our actual data model. And now you'll see we have 2 tables inside of here once this gets done loading. And what we can do is we can start to create relationships between these different tables. So once this preview loads up here, I'm going to see my customer table and my sale table. And all I have to do to create relationships is just like you do in Power BI normally. All I'm going to do is I'm going to drag the customer ID from my sale table and drop it onto the customer ID over on my customer table. All right. Well, it just really doesn't want me to use that one. So we'll go back over to this other workspace and we'll just play here for the rest of the night. So we'll get to our data set. Oops. Sorry about that. Into our endpoint. And we'll go over to our data model. And then inside of our data model, like I said, we'll see all of our tables inside of here. And then in order to create this relationship between these 2 tables, all I have to do, again, is just drag and drop customer onto customer. This particular relationship already exists, so I'm not going to recreate this one, but you'll see the normal Power BI relationship page here that you're used to normally seeing. At this point, I can come in, I can create a new report, just click on new report from up on the ribbon up here at the top, and I'm able to go ahead and do all my normal report development from there, again, without having to load the data in or do any of that. Okay. The next thing that we're going to do is take a look at one other way. So I mentioned there were 3 ways. We only actually covered 2 so far. But if I come over here and I say, I want to grab data with a data flow. Again, if you're coming from the Power BI world, this is going to be a little bit familiar. If you're coming from the data factory world, this might be a little bit new for you. So we did have data wrangling data flows or mapping data flows over inside the data factory world. And those are what we've basically got here inside this environment. So I can grab data from it, just import the data from a CSV file. I can come over here and I can actually just upload data if I don't even want to have to go grab it from someplace else. So I can just grab my customer.csv file and I'll click on next once that gets done uploading. So again, I don't even have to provision a storage account or anything like that. I can literally just drag and drop data into this environment. And you'll see that now we've got a little bit of work to do. So this is really great if, it's perfectly fine if you don't have to do any data transformation, but more often than not, you're probably gonna have to do a little bit of data cleanup. So a couple of things just off the top that we wanna be able to clean up really, really quick. We'll notice, first of all, that we've got a couple of rows here that have some data missing or don't contain data rather, so we can just ignore those. We also have this row here is where our headers are. And then we've also got city, state, country is kind of all together over here inside this one column. So maybe we want to rip that apart. So really, really easy to do all this stuff. If you're familiar with Power Query, this is all we're building here is doing some Power Query. We'll say that we want to remove the top 3 rows to get rid of those 3 rows, the header rows up here, the audit rows out of the file. And now we've got our header rows are in the first row. So we can say use first rows headers. It's going to promote that. And what you see over here on the right-hand side is every single click that we've made is a separate step in here. And every time I try to re-import this file, it's actually going to run through each one of these individual steps. And I can remove a step if I want to. I can go back and edit that step, and I don't have to go reapply every single one of those. It'll, as long as it doesn't remove data that's referenced later on, I can actually come back here and change any one of these steps that I would like. Okay. Now, ripping this data apart, if we were in SQL, or in Spark, we'd probably do like a substring or a mid or some sort of string manipulation function to try to find where the next comma is inside of that. It can get kind of ugly. But over here in the Power Query world, all we have to do is say split column by and tell it I want to split this by a particular delimiter. And in our case, we want to do this with by comma. And now we've got all of our all 3 of these fields are split out. Okay, and now we can filter out a bunch of data if we want to. Normally, I would filter out Canada and the UK, but I feel like I might get in trouble for doing that tonight. So we'll keep all the Canada data. We'll get rid of everything else. And then, so now we've got all of our Canada data inside of here. So we don't even need this column anymore. So we can just actually get rid of that one. And then we can rename these to, city, state, or city, province, or whatever you guys want to make those for this piece here. And then again, we could go through and do some standardization or pull out those postal codes that don't make sense or are malformed or anything like that. But you get the idea. We can do a lot of data transformation here without having to write any code whatsoever. And then we can just publish this out. And then that data flow shows up here. Once that gets done publishing, we'll just rename that to something more useful, and we'll be able to drop that data into our lakehouse or inside of our warehouse. That was one thing I didn't actually click on, which I probably should have. Down in the bottom right-hand corner, let me just use this other one that's already built. But down here in this bottom right-hand corner, we've got this data destination option. So we can drop this into the file section, the table section of our lakehouse, or coming soon, you'll be able to drop that into your data warehouse even if you want to. So we don't have to go to the lakehouse necessarily. Okay. One other thing I want to show you about the lakehouse, just to kind of cover off on this, but we'll get into this in more detail with the session next month, is going to be around shortcuts. So up to this point, all of the work that we've, let me close this out here. All of the work that we've done so far if I look at my lake house here, has been related to data that we've imported into the environment. So whether it was through uploads or whether it was through the data flows or through OneLake File Explorer. But those shortcuts are super powerful. And if I come over here and I say, I want to create a new shortcut, we've got these three options today. So you can create shortcuts to other items and other workspaces inside of OneLake, or I can come over to my Azure Data Lake storage and say that I want to go to HTTPS, give it a URL here, dfs.core.windows.net. All right, I've already got a connection set up for that, but that would be your authentication there. So I'm going to go over to my storage account. And then inside of my storage account, I happen to know that I have a container in there called sample data. So I'm going to call this one sample shortcut. Is going to be the name of the shortcut, but I want to point it at the sample data container. Okay? So I'll click create here. And just like that, I can now see every single piece of information that's stored in my existing data lake. I didn't have to do any ETL or anything like that. So I've got, if I've got data inside my airline folder, inside my wide world importers, there's some of my data, my backups and everything. If I go into my IMDb data, I know I've got some stuff in here. I can drill down and I can see each one of the different tables inside of here. So I don't even have to import the data. The other thing that's super cool about this is if I hop back over to my file explorer and I go over to, which one was that? I think that was my Learn with the Nerds one, into my lake house. I think I got the right one here. Let's find out. Files. There's that my sample shortcut that we just created. Okay, so it's even accessible through the file system here, just locally on my computer, and I can drill in and I can see the exact same set of data that was inside my Azure Data Lake account. So super, super powerful to be able to bring in existing assets that you've already built. The other thing that we can do here is if I come over here into my tables section, I can actually create table shortcuts as well. So if I do the same thing and I create this shortcut here, and I do HTTPS, cbrdl storage 01.dfs.core windows.net, right? We'll click on next. Now, I happen to know inside that IMDb folder that we were just in, I happen to know I have a person table inside of there. And just so that I don't accidentally type this all wrong, I have this just copied and pasted here. But this path is going to take me down to that person folder that we were just looking at a minute ago. So we'll give that a second to look at that. But here's where it's actually going. It's going into my Delta. It's going to person. And you'll see I've got all these Parquet files in here in my Delta log. So this was a set of tables that were created. In this case, I created it with Fabric Spark. But this could easily be a table that you created over on with Databricks, for instance, to be able to bring that in. So if I click on person, it will give me a preview of that data. And I can even come over here into my SQL endpoint, just like we did a little bit earlier. So knowing earlier we were querying the Delta tables that were inside of OneLake, now I can come over here and I can just do a T-SQL query, say select top 10 star from dpo.person. And this is actually, think about all the different things that you got to have going on here in order for this to actually work and what this would take to actually set up inside of your environment. But what we have here is a set of compute that we didn't have to go tell it, I want to spin up new compute. It's just grabbing compute that's out there and using it. And now I'm taking that compute and I'm actually querying data that sits in a completely separate Azure Data Lake storage account, all through the power of that shortcut within OneLake to view this all as just one copy of the data. And now I could pick that stuff up with Power BI if I wanted to, and do bring that data into Power BI and never even have to move the data. So again, if you've got all these existing things inside your environment, that you want to be able to leverage, Fabric is going to give you the ability, as much as we possibly can, to tap into those existing investments and just use them with this new environment here and bring it all together to help you, get insights from all of the data inside your environment. Okay, so at this point, we've taken a look at the lakehouse. We've taken a look a little bit at reporting, but I know there were a couple of folks out there who are in the ETL developer crowd, as well as the data warehousing, or just the BI folks. So for real quick, this part won't take too long, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new warehouse, and I'm going to just call this one WWI warehouse, because I know I've got another one in there that's called DW. All right, so WWI DW, Wide World Importers Data Warehouse. Again, if you've ever done this in the Synapse environment, you'll know that this is probably going to be about a 5 to 10 minute exercise on a good day to go and spin up that new warehouse. Even if you're going out and spinning up just a SQL database that's like a basic SQL database for $5 a month, can hold 2 gigs worth of data. Even that's going to take 2 or 3 minutes to go out there and spin up. But all we did was we clicked a button, and now we've got a data warehouse spun up and ready to go in just about 30 seconds. So before we jump into that any further, I did see, I think there was a hand or two up. Is that right?
Yep. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I just have a follow-up question with your shortcuts.
Sure.
When you set up the shortcut, and what kind of security connection you are going to allow? And the second part would be, can the user get the access without being granted to the
Sure.
Original source?
Yep, good question. So in my case here, I'm using my identity, or I believe it was my identity that had in there to be able to go over and authenticate. But Venkatesh, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah. So that's a great question, John. So the way we are envisioning shortcut security is currently we support ADLS, Azure Data Lake, and Amazon S3 shortcuts. So we support all types of authentication that the source is allowing us to. For example, in ADLS, we support single sign-on, which is the default authentication. If you go to the UI, it's called an organizational account. So when Brad logged in, it showed Brad's organizational account. So that's by default, we use the single sign-on SSO. We also have other options such as SaaS token, service principals, and account keys that you can leverage to access that. So regardless of whatever identity that you can put, the shortcuts will use that particular identity's authentication to connect to the storage. So any person who is using this shortcut will in turn be able to consume the data using the identity who created that shortcut. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, you can, let's say for a data lake, you may use the key to have the access, but the end user may not supposed to have the access to either some parts of the folder or some parts of the files. But now I got all the access to.
Perfect. Yeah, that's a great segue for the way we are planning to implement this is what we call as a one security. Just like how OneLake is a hub for all your data, including the data that is exposed via the shortcuts, there is going to be a layer of security attached to it called one security, where you can define all the data security requirements in one place, and all the engines will honor that. For example, you can define, hey, who can see which table, which column, what rows they can see, what type of data treatments to be used in one security layer, which will be honored by regardless of whichever engines that you query from. It could be SQL engine, Spark engine, Power BI, etc. So that is coming.
Okay, thank you.
And then we'll go ahead and do, so there's one other hand up. We'll go ahead and do that question before we keep going here.
Hello, Venkatesh. My name is Swapna. So I have a question. Currently, we are using the ADSL Gen 2 as a shared data lake for our project. So with Microsoft Fabric, which comes with one data lake house or data warehouse, can we use as a shared database or data lake?
So yeah, what do you mean by shared data lake is you have like a central data lake which is
Yeah,
shared by multiple projects. So
yeah.
yes, that is very much possible in one lake. So one lake is the concept of virtualization of all your storage accounts. So today what you might perhaps have is a bunch of different storage accounts for handling different projects, and probably you might have some of the storage accounts shared across different projects. With the concept of one lake, you can bring all your storage accounts into one umbrella for your organization and start consuming the data in multiple computes and start securing them in one place.
Okay. The same IAM or the roles which are there in currently in Azure applies for Fabric too?
Absolutely. So that is the default authentication and authorization method that we use. So
Mhm.
whatever IAM roles that you have set for that particular container or a file in your storage accounts will be honored in one lake.
So in Azure, there is a concept called system managed identity. Does that apply in Fabric too?
The managed identities is one of the features that is coming down the line. So at the moment we have OAuth and SaaS and service principles as a means of authentication, but that is something that we are working on. So it will
Okay.
be in the future.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Some cool. Thanks. All right. So now that we've got our warehouse built here, let's go ahead and actually grab a little bit of data to bring in. So what I've got already spun up, if I go over here and we look at my SQL server, I have the wide world importers database over here on just Azure SQL DB is all this is. So I've got all the OLTP tables inside of here, and we want to grab one of those. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I want to get data with the pipeline. Again, we could do this with the data flow you see there, but get item data from WWI. Create. And this is going to launch us into the wizard for copy data. You certainly can go build your own pipeline and do all of this through that experience. But with the copy data wizard, what you're going to see is we got some sample data sets at the top here if you want to get started. Otherwise, you can grab data from 90 plus different places out here. So I'm going to say I want to grab this from SQL database. I'm going to click Azure SQL database, do next. Now, I happen to have an existing connection out here already to my wide world importers database, but you could certainly do a new connection here and just fill out the little screen, server name, credentials, all that kind of stuff. But we'll just go ahead and use my existing connection to the wide world importers database. Click on next. And then on the next screen that pops up here, what you will see is two options. You can either one, select from a list of tables that are available to you from inside the database, or two, you can write a query to be able to pull out a specific set of results from inside of the database. And it's taking a sweet time to validate my connection there, but we've got a list of all of our existing tables. So I'm just going to filter this down and I'm going to grab the stock item table, click on next. Because I initiated this from my data warehouse, it already knows that that's where I want to drop this into. Again, if you're going through this experience directly from the pipeline, you could pick any lakehouse, any warehouse, any other supported destination there. And because I don't have any existing tables, I want to go ahead and just let this create my table for me. So I'm going to call this one dbo.item. I'm going to click next. So yeah, I want to stage the data. That's fine. Say, hey, you know what? We'll go ahead and start running this pipeline, and we'll just let that run here for a couple of seconds. So again, we could go in, we could run a create table script, and we could, we could get all the correct DDL and everything that we want inside of there. But for purposes of time, we're just going to have this generate the actual table output for us. And if we come over here and refresh this, you'll see it's been running for about 16 seconds there. So I think this usually takes somewhere, under a minute or so to run. And what we'll see at the end of this is if we go back over into our wide world importers data warehouse here, we'll be able to see this new table created. Should be approaching the end. If I want to see the progress as well, I can click on the little glasses here at the bottom, and it's going to pop out my little window here, and you'll see that it actually finished 31 seconds while we were clicking on that, but it pulled out 227 rows, and then off my screen there a little bit, you'll see it wrote 227 rows as well. Okay, so that's easy way to create a pipeline and get data in. And now we're able to, for the last 5 minutes or so here, let's take a look at how we actually can get insight out of this. Inside out, yeah. Anyway, you know what I mean. We want to figure out something useful about our data. Now, the problem that we have here is you'll maybe be keen on noticing is that I've got some data over in my warehouse, but I've got everything else that we just spent the last half hour or so doing is over in my lake house. And I really need to be able to bring those two together and marry them together in order to be able to do something useful with this data. So that means I need to be able to, in today's world or 2 months ago's world, I would have had to copy all that data into my warehouse. Now, because of one copy, the ability for all these engines to work together, I don't have to do that. So my item table, I actually found this, I did a very similar presentation for this Learn with the Nerds Day here a week or so ago. And as I was getting ready to do that presentation, I happened to search in here, and there's all kinds of stuff. Like you can come in here and just see DBA. So there's all of these DBA mugs. Ironically, there's not a DBA mug in here that just says no, because I know working with DBAs, that's like the favorite phrase of any DBA is just no, I'm not going to do it. So maybe we need to get them to update the data set here for that. But it depends. We did do good with that one. But I happen to notice I'm a little bit of a, I like pizza a lot. And I happen to notice that there's a USB flash drive in here for pizza. So right before I did that meeting last week, like 10 minutes before I decided I was going to rewrite my queries and screw the stuff that I knew worked, we're going to start looking at some pizza data. So we'll look at that pizza data here today too. But I want to analyze all of my my pizza flash drive sales because clearly the pizza products are the most important ones inside any organization. So I could certainly come over here and do some queries. So if we do select top 10 star from dbo.item, we can see we've got all the items in here, same stuff we were just looking at. We can also, interesting thing that we can do here is we can join over to the other lake house. So my item data is sitting here inside my warehouse, but all of my sale and customer data sits over in my lake house. And now, again, rather than having to move all that data around and everything, I can just run this query here. And as long as everything's right inside of this workspace, ruined something in there. Here we go. So let's see here to my sales, make sure. All right, so there we go. Now I can actually run a query between two different compute engines inside of my Fabric environment. So right now I am marrying together data that's sitting inside of a relational database and data that's sitting out in a data lake just in Delta format out there all together. And the magic of this is behind this warehouse actually sits a bunch of Delta files so that we can continue to just use that new Power BI direct link mode against either one of these. The other thing in here that's really cool, and we'll kind of wrap up with this here, is my pizza data. So if we take a look at my sales, and let me run this again, make sure it works over here on this workspace here. But what I've got here is all the sales related to my pizza USB drives, because those again are the most important ones. And I can certainly come over here, see there's 1,000 records, that's nice. But what if I want to visualize those? I can actually take this right here and highlight that text, say I want to visualize the results, and it's going to turn that query into a Power BI report for me. Okay? So now I've got all of my data available to me, and I can come over here and I can see, what were my what was my profit by, or let's say region. Let's see here, is that the right one that we want? If we look at the region, oops, sorry, delete that. If we just look at our sales territories, regions, put that into a list. Okay, so we've got all of our different regions here. If we then look at, the quantity sold for each one of those, we can do that. We can also put our profit out here and turn that into a KPI. So we can see pizza's making us a pretty solid profit, but it wouldn't be a presentation and a report about pizza if we didn't turn this into a pizza chart. And then we can also take our chart here, and again, without having to, we're not moving any data around or anything like that. But we're going to take our little pizza chart here, and we're going to actually filter some values. We're going to only look at kind of the middle folks to see who's really selling the bulk of our pizza here. So we're going to say that we want to take where the quantity is greater than 500. Apply that, get rid of a couple of those small ones in there. So now we're starting to make our chart look a little bit more like a pizza. And where the quantity is less than 1,000, we'll apply that. And that's pretty darn close. So it's, a little lopsided. Maybe there's a new person slicing the pie that day or something like that. But now we can clearly come in here and do some analysis on each one of the different sales territories and how many pizza USB sticks they actually, how many they actually sold. So we can save this report too. Save that as our pizza analysis. And so without having to move any data, this report right here at the very end of this was kind of the culmination of all of the things that we talked about. This has some data that we loaded just by dragging and dropping our sales data into OneLake. We were able to go into the File Explorer on our computer, just upload a file that way, and then we use a Spark notebook to be able to take the customer data, which gives us our sales territories in here, and to be able to load all that data inside of this. And then we were able to go over to our data warehouse and use a familiar T-SQL environment to be able to use a copy activity and load that data over there, all to ultimately build this beautiful report that we've got here at the very end. So that's not to say that that's the best architecture or the way that you would do this in real life, but that just goes to show every single person that's out there right now, whether you're that data engineer, whether you're that BI professional, whether you're the DBA manager overseeing all this stuff, or whether you're the Power BI person building this at the end, every single person is able to bring their particular skill set into the Fabric environment and be able to do their portion, their slice of the pie, if you will, and be able to ultimately work together to build one successful end result of your ultimate analysis that comes out the other end of this. So that's really what Fabric is all about. It's about giving you the ability to bring your skill set, let everybody work together. And that's what this screen here, as we kind of wrap up, that's what this is all about. Giving everybody the ability to write data into OneLake, one format in Delta, all the engines work together to be able to bring you some insight. So with that, I know we're right up about time here, but if there's any questions or anything like that to wrap out for Venkatesh and I, love to have those, and I'll throw my contact information up here on the slides as well, just so that you got that in case there's anything that comes up afterward.
Hi, Brad. I just have one or two questions. So, can Power Apps or Power Automate flows connect to this one data lake inside Fabric?
I don't know any reason why you wouldn't be able to. Like I said, if we're using the one or the ADLS APIs to do that, then there should be the ability to do that. Venkatesh, I don't know if you talked with anybody about specifics of that though.
Yeah, so the basically the one lake, it's we are just built an abstraction layer. Underlying, we use the ADLS as the underlying storage that's powering the one lake. So all the integrations that you are able to do with ADLS storage accounts, you will be eventually be able to do it with one lake as well. So your Power Apps automation will work exactly like how it might work with ADLS storage accounts, but with all the
Okay.
power of one lake.
Okay. The other question is, in the one leg, there are no containers, right? Where in the normal storage account, there are containers. So how can we deal with blobs? I know you have shown files where we can store the Parquet and CSV, but what about the containers? We don't have the upper level.
Right. So you can kind of at a high level, if you want to draw the parallels, you can almost think of a workspace as a or the individual lake houses rather as kind of the high level container there. So either the workspace level or the lake house level would kind of be the container level. Probably the workspace is probably a better parallel, because inside the workspace in that container, you would have, by default, you get access to all the data that's inside of there, and then you could secure the individual lake houses or warehouses, because those are all showing up as folders underneath there. But yeah, the actual concept of the pure container level isn't there.
Yeah, so that's a great point. It's like an abstraction, and one thing that this is where exactly the SaaS world comes in. Underneath the facts, like for example, one lake, it's equivalent to one drive per se, right? Like when you have one drive, normally the things that you deal with in one drive is like files and folders. In one lake, you would normally do the same, but with tables and views coming in addition to that. Underneath the covers, you don't worry about, hey, how many storage accounts do I have? How many storage containers do I have? What sort of access control, the RWX permissions that it has? We are kind of abstracting all these details from you, and you just worry about dealing with files and folders and tables and views.
Okay, got it. Yeah. Okay, and how can we get started? You said trail account, we can get started, right? Just we need to use our Microsoft account to get started.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So when you go into the Power BI environment, or you go to fabric.microsoft.com, up in the top right, if you click on your picture, you'll notice that there will be an option here to start the trial. If
Okay.
you don't see that, the other way that you can get the trial started is to go to a workspace and try to create from the workspace level, is try to create any one of these items that are part of the new Fabric workloads. So things like data flows Gen 2, pipelines, notebooks, warehouse, anything that's new inside of in here in preview. The other thing, the last kind of caveat I will mention though, is if you don't see either of those, the ability to do either of those, it could be that it's not turned on, that the Fabric workloads are not turned on for your tenant. So right now, in today's world, your tenant admin has to go in and flip a switch that says, I want to enable Fabric, and then you'll be able to spin up the trial. Starting on July 1st, though, the default is going to be that Fabric is turned on in the environment. We just wanted to make sure that everybody had a little bit of time to react, and admins didn't wake up the day after build and they saw all this new stuff in there and had no controls or anything like that. So, you might not be able to see it yet because it might not be enabled just yet,
Okay.
but that's how you get to it.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks, Venkatesh.
Yep.
You're welcome.
I
John?
think there is another question here from John. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. My question is related to the DevOps. Back to the Synapse, we have different environment, right? Dev, UA, test, and prod. We use the traditional DevOps to promote the changes. In this Fabric, are we going to do the similar things, or it's different?
I'll kind of give the initial answer to my thoughts, and Venkatesh, I'll let you expand from there. But I say, similar but different. So yeah, we only have one fabric. There's only one lake, all that kind of stuff. But you do have different workspaces. So in this environment, I could certainly see you having a dev test prod workspace as opposed to a dev test prod Synapse workspace. But Venkatesh, you want to see
Sure,
what your
yeah.
thoughts are here?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like Brad said, the concepts are very similar when it comes to deployment. In the world of Fabric, we are making it a little bit easier, so to speak. Every workspace will have integration with Git, kind of a source control repository. So you would normally, one way to go about it would be to have workspace level distinctions between your environments. For example, you have development, you have UAT, you have production. You would create a workspace for dev, workspace for UAT, and workspace for production. And each workspace would run in its own capacity so that it can have its own compute and all that good stuff. And when it comes to promoting the code from one to the other environment, typically you would connect your dev workspace to a GitHub or something. And you would use what we call as a deployment pipeline to move the artifacts from one repository to the other. Unlike in Synapse, in the world of Fabric, you have two options for that. You can do everything using a UI interface, like there is a create deployment pipeline button right there on the workspace that you can see. You can click that and you will be able to move artifacts, like pick and choose what you want to move from one to the other. You also can do automatically, like what you're used to in Synapse and other environments, using DevOps pipeline, using DevOps tasks and GitHub actions and stuff like that. So it's both for business users and developers.
Okay. In the Synapse, in the law, typically you only have the dev workspace associated with the Git repository. But here it sounds like all the workspace should be associated with a
That's an
repository.
option. Yeah, it is an option. So I would still follow the best practices of DevOps, where we associate development for collaboration. Whereas when it comes to other higher environments, we normally do not allow users to collaborate. Rather, we would have a defined pipelines to move the artifacts. So that kind of concepts can still be applied to Fabric. On the other hand, if you want to have collaborations in multiple workspaces by associating it to a GitHub, you are open to do so. We are not restricting you to do one or the other, but you can still follow all the DevOps best practices in this Fabric world as well.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I got a question. Sorry. Sorry, no, you go ahead. Go ahead. I'll wait. I'll let you go.
Sorry about that. Venkatesh, are there any limitations on number of workspaces we can create? Currently, Synapse is 50 per subscription, I think so.
That's a great question. So the concept of workspace itself is totally different when it comes to Synapse and Fabric. Workspace in Synapse is more than an item of collaboration. We have some physical resources assigned to workspaces, just endpoints, a serverless SQL pool. It is tied to an actual Azure resource and stuff like that. But in the concept of Fabric, workspace, you can look at workspace as more like a folder of various sort of artifacts to collaborate. Currently, there is no limit that I'm aware of in Fabric for the number of workspaces. You can have as many workspaces in your tenant as you can. Brad, if you are aware of anything, please go ahead.
Nope. No, as far as I am aware, there's no limit. I'm sure there probably is, but nothing that I'm aware of.
Okay. Thank you.
That would be a good relief for you from from the Synapse world to the Fabric. There is no limit on the number of workspaces.
Yes.
You can create as many.
Yeah, we are looking for the same. Thank you.
Well, now probably I can go ahead before asking question. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Venkatesh. Sorry, I was not able to join at the beginning. We had like office event, but the question is related to John. What he asked is a DevOps. So we have different personas in in Fabric, right? So now in future, what's going to happen is like Power BI developer, data engineer, maybe data scientist, they're all going to work together. Say, okay, let's probably park the data science. Rather, most of the cases, BI team like Power BI and data engineer, they really closely work with. Earlier, Power BI didn't have those DevOps capability with this, with the Git integration. Now it's coming. So will it be always like the same repository we can use and share for both BI and data engineering team, or it has to be separate because one is for only Power BI team and one when is a data engineering team, they're gonna have separate code repository. Should it be separate, or it's okay to have like same Git repo still works?
So Brad, you want to take that or?
So I think there's probably two answers or two sides to this, and Venkatesh, from a technical perspective, keep me honest here. But as far as the tying of a repo to a workspace, if they're all working in one workspace, then they're all going to have to be using the same repo. Now, if you, from an organizational perspective, you just make the decision, you say, hey, we want these folks to be able to work in separate repos. There's nothing preventing you from creating two separate workspaces and keeping that separation there and making that clear line. Because from a compute perspective, you can actually assign both of those workspaces to the same capacity. And because of OneLake and the shortcuts and all that, you can access the data between those workspaces for those different workloads as well. So to an extent, it really comes down to how you want to actually manage that, whether you want them to share a repo or whether you prefer to have them in separate repos with separate deployment life cycles. Both of those obviously come with their complexities and their overheads, though.
Yeah, so one thing that I would like to add to what Brad said is, yes, it's absolutely depending upon the choice here. What we have seen in the world of Synapse is like the each workspace is tied to a repository. It's like a one-on-one connection between a workspace to a repo. In the world of Fabric, we are making it a little bit more flexible that a workspace is connected to a branch in a repository. So if you have multiple workspaces, you could still have one repository with multiple workspaces with a different branching strategy, or you could go the orthodox way of, hey, here's your workspace, this is your repo, here you go collaborate. And you create another workspace with another repo, and here you go collaborate. Obviously, as Brad mentioned, from a compute perspective, you can attach it to various different compute capacities, unlike Synapse. That's the flexibility that what you have here. So you have more options here to play with.
Got it. No, thank you so much for the clarity. Okay, thanks.
Yep. I saw there was a question that came through in the chat. It was just around connectivity. It said outside Fabric can connect to data inside the data warehouse or in OneLake. Is there private endpoints that we can use? So today the answer to that is no, but that is very high on the priority list. So just keep an eye out for any announcements or any developments on that front. When we have something to announce there, we certainly will. But as far as the actual connectivity goes, as I mentioned before, ADLS endpoints for OneLake to be able to get data from there, SQL endpoints for the SQL sides. Like if we go to our lakehouse or our warehouse, we can come over here, copy the connection string, and then this is just the server name that would ultimately pop into a connection dialog box over here. So same way that you would normally connect to it, but private endpoints are coming.
And to top it all, you also have a XMLA endpoint. If you are a Power BI Premium, you can connect your reports through XMLA as well. So yeah, all these kind of endpoints, based on different artifacts, we have different endpoints, and we will have all the security measures that you are used to in the past world will be coming to Fabric as well.
Yep, absolutely. And so one thing to point out with that is I know on the Power BI side, there are some some things you have to have a certain size capacity, like the XMLA endpoint, you have to have Power BI Premium for that. It's not part of Premium per user, I don't believe. But all of that functionality will be available all the way down to that initial F2 SKU over on the Fabric side. So you're able to get access to more stuff at a lower price point than having to do the reservation on a premium capacity.
Thank you. Just one last question. In the backend, to use this Fabric, we need to create any Fabric cluster in Azure?
So there's at a high level, there's three ways. One, as I mentioned, is the trial that's available in there right now. Two would be the premium capacities that you're used to getting with Power BI, where you commit to a 1-year reservation for that. And then the third way would be through Azure itself. So like if we come over here and we've got a service in here for Microsoft Fabric, and I can create a Fabric capacity here inside the Azure portal. This would be kind of the equivalent of what you would do today to get an A SKU up and running. The difference here is this is a Fabric capacity, so it covers everything that you would have inside of the Fabric world. So basically, this is the Azure equivalent of going and buying Power BI Premium. So any Fabric workload, any Power BI workload that requires premium, all of that is covered under these SKUs here.
Okay. Thanks, Brad. Thanks.
All right. Any last
Yeah.
questions before we wrap it up then?
Yeah, I think we're already kind of over time, but yeah, Deborah, please take it out.
Thank you so much. That was really, really good. I'm very excited about the Power BI part personally. So we appreciate you both taking the time to join us and for people participating and asking some great questions. Definitely, this is a very popular subject and it'll tie in well with our next one. But we want to thank you very much, and we'll make sure we get a copy of the presentation out to everybody. And if there's further questions, I did take a snippet of Brad's contact info as well too, so we'll make sure we get that in the communication as well. So thank you so much for joining us, and hope everybody has a great evening.
Awesome. Thank you. I really appreciate you having me.
Alrighty.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot, Brad and Venkatesh. Thank you.